Yeah, welcome to everyone out there. This is 340 Paddler or Chris Lidke, however you care to look at me. If someone can get me a luchador type mask with the black face and two blue squares for eyes, that'd be fantastic. I swear I'll wear it on the river. Anyway, we are here for MR340 Live, talking about training and racing. And we have a number of guests. First of all, myself, I have 7 finishes for the 340. Yes, this is really my bedroom. Yes, my wife hasn't divorced me yet over it. And yes, that's a giant map of the Missouri River behind me. So I have 7 finishes, 4 sub 50s, somewhere in there. Then we have our other panelists, starting just sort of in order on my screen. We have Eric Pikey with a 2020 finish of 62 hours. Good finish. He's representing sort of the general pack finisher, a little bit on the fast side, but that works for us. Then we have Salli O'Donnell, who has a remarkable record. In 2017, she was the 2nd solo boat, the 1st solo female. Last year, she had to pull out at mile 285 for an injury, but at the time, she was running as the 1st solo boat. Had Joe Mann been out there, she might have been slightly ahead of him, but he was on the Kraken. We'll get to him in a second. And then she's also been the 7th solo, 1st solo woman at the Texas Water Safari, and then 2nd solo, 1st solo woman at the Great Alabama 650. Looks like she's done that a couple of times. So fantastic work there. And then the man, the myth, the legend. It is said that he hasn't actually peed on the river. It is said that Joe Mann doesn't actually touch the water, rather floating on the backs of well-trained carp. Yes, the man, the myth, the legend, with 6 or 7 sub 50 finishes, course record, everything else, Joe Mann.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you very much. And it's not the course record. It's not the course record yet. Okay, that's still on the bucket list, but thank you.
We'll get there. So what I want to do is kind of introduce everyone to what's going on. What we have is our panelists, Eric, Salli, and Joe. I have a series of questions. We're going to be dealing with training and racing, some of the physical component, the mental component, and I'm going to be throwing questions out there. I'm also going to be keeping an eye on the Q&A. So if you have questions, you can drop them into the chat or drop them into the Q&A function. You will notice that other than the panelists, everyone is muted. That's because this is a webinar and we're trying to just sort of make that work the way that it does. If you're on YouTube Live, you can drop a question into the chat, and I believe Steve from River Relief is going to be watching that. So that should take care of what's going on. Otherwise, yeah. That was a quick introduction. Apparently, I should cut down on the coffee. Let's move into what we're dealing with. So while we were chatting before we got started, Eric was asking, Joe, how do you train? So let's start there.
How do we train? How do I train?
How do you train?
How do I train? Okay. Before I answer that question, Chris, I'd like to say 2 things. Number one, congratulations to Steve Schnarr and Missouri River Relief for taking the reins of the MR340 and this year and making it, leading it to even bigger and better things. So let's give a big hand to Steve Schnarr and Missouri River Relief, and of course Chris Lidke today for doing this. And number 2. If you live in Kansas City or anywhere near Kansas City or anywhere, how about go Chiefs, right? It's a great time to be a Chiefs fan.
As a Packers fan, I can tell you that to get to the Super Bowl, you have to beat the Packers. It's unfortunate, but anyway.
I have a red towel for your tears if you want.
Yes.
All right. How do I train? You know, I look at my training kind of in an annual cyclical fashion. So let's start from like the day after paddling season. The day after paddling season, so immediately when I'm done with the 340, or if, you know, maybe it goes a little longer and I finished with the 650 like last year, then, you know, those next 2 or 3 weeks is just recovery. And lots of cheeseburgers and pizza and all the good stuff, right? But then, I use the off season to kind of let my paddling muscles relax and not get overworked. And I'll do a lot of cross training. So whether that's mountain biking in the fall, running in the fall, I do a lot of weightlifting in the winter. So I'll really just do some cross sports to keep my aerobic fitness in the right spot, and then really build back the muscle that I lost kind of November, December, January, February. So I'm right in the middle of the weightlifting session. So I'll put some weight back on, get the muscles back up where they need to be, because you kind of lose those muscles. You kind of self-cannibalize during the ultra endurance paddling season. So, and then also during winter, I'll run a lot as well to keep the cardio. Then somewhere around February, so in about a month from now, about 3 or 4 or 5 weeks from now, but the end of February, I'll cut the weight training out and really start going heavy on running, and then get out on the water as soon as I can when it unfreezes. I do have an ergometer here. I do that regularly, but not as much. Once the water gets unfrozen, then I'll get out there, 2 or 3 times a week. So once that gets kind of in full swing, I paddle. I kind of took a page out of a running guide, and I'll try to do sprints or intervals. I'll do a tempo, and I'll do a distance every week on the paddling. So my distance might be, anything 2 hours or more. My intervals will be anywhere between 1 minute and 5 minutes, like all out sprint or as fast, hard as you can go at that duration for 1 to 5 minutes, depending on who I'm with. And then I'll also do some tempo, which might be a 5K or a 10K, something somewhere between 25 to 50 minutes. I'll do a real hard tempo, and so I'll do those 3 things once a week, and that's it. So I'm only in the boat, 3 to 4 hours a week, 2 to 3 times a week, and then I'll do ultra races like the Shootout, the Gutbuster, the Freedom Race leading up. So those will be my kind of like long distance that I kind of like you're training for a marathon. You kind of increase your mileage, and then you kind of go down a little bit. You increase your mileage, you go down a little bit, you increase until you peak there at your marathon. And so I gear it towards whatever I'm doing that year. So this year, for example, I'm doing the Texas Water Safari. So I'll do a big paddle endurance, then really almost quit paddling then from the safari until the 340, because then I'll focus more on cycling for the Kraken again as we go back for another crack at that. And then as soon as 340 is done, I'll get back on the paddling again for the 650. So.
All right. And no, it's good to know that we have the Kraken coming back. So second place is still available for those of you interested.
I've heard that there's going to be some competition this year. I heard that there's going to be a 6-man boat that is not so fond of pedal paddlers winning the race. So we'll see. I hope we have some good competition.
Nice. And Salli, how does your training usually come together?
Wow. First of all, Joe, I have to say I'm impressed. I'm not that formal in my training. I don't think I have been for any sport that I've done throughout my life. It's just been kind of like, just lifestyle type of activity. But I do have a paddle season, the race season, and we're starting to gear up for that. So during the, I'll start kind of like Joe, because I like the way it flowed. At the end of a race season, that's my maintenance period also. Unfortunately for me, is like I'm always having something that needs to be repaired, whether it's a broken ankle, in which I broke right before the Texas Water Safari 2 years ago. This year it was addressing that lat that I injured during the MR340, but kind of pushed it through the 650. I ended up having some nerve issues, so I had to have, so it's always these little surgeries that I'm having. So that's usually my month after the race season. Then it's another month of just trying to get things back. And then, so usually it's around January or so that I start thinking about kicking in. In the meanwhile, for me, all my training is a lot to do with keeping my flexibility. Now that's been key for me, and everything I do is keeping my flexibility. So I have a regimen of at least 5 times a week doing a stretching regimen that I do. try to do the formal things like going to a yoga class, try to do the formal going to the gym, but I'm just not that type of person. I just do it at my house. So then we do little races. We've got a cool little group here that stand-up paddlers, because there's hardly any double blade paddlers around this place. But they let us come in, and they have on Thursday nights, they do this thing called a Thursday night throwdown, which is a race that's a little shy of 2 miles, but it's my sprint work. So I'm getting a good sprint in, at least every Thursday. And then, my training on the water besides that is, I'll do like an hour to 2 hours of just, I push it with my husband. Mike is a really good trainer. And so he really focuses on my technique. And so he pushes me. So I'm trying to keep up with him all the time, and he's helping me with my form. That'll go on throughout February, and then getting into March, I'll start doing my longer ones where I'm just paddling on my own for once a week. I'll do like a 3 or 4 hour paddle, because what I'm finding for me is that I just have to really listen to my body, and I can't do that when I'm paddling around others. So if I take a few hours by myself, then I can start adjusting and understanding what my stroke needs. So like I said, nothing quite as formal as what Joe does. I'm very impressed with that. So it's just listening to my body and go type of thing.
So Salli, if I'm understanding this, I'm kind of taking notes here so that I can train like you. So you've got your sprint, your 2 mile sort of sprint work. You've got 1 to 2 hours of technique work. Is that?
I would say that. It's now, because I'm relatively new at paddling, my learning curve has been like straight up, and each year I've had different injuries as I'm adjusting and learning, the better technique. I started out by blowing out my forearms, then I've learned.
Not required of rookie paddlers.
Huh?
Not required of rookie paddlers. Try not to.
Yeah, really.
I've done it too. Yeah, my first year.
Yeah, and so what I found out for me, one thing was, keeping my wrist neutral, and then also I used to have a feather in my my paddles, but I now paddle neutral, so there's no rotation and everything, and I've learned more to use my torso and just frame. So it's just, there's a lot of just listening to the nuances of my body. And tweaking, and Mike has such a very good eye for technique. He studies the YouTube stuff, and he knows how to coach me. I'm very coachable, which is fortunate for me. So he'll coach me, and I'll make my adjustments, and then I apply them on my longer paddles, and then I'll come back and talk with him, and say what I feel and don't, and tell him what I think I should do, and then we kind of come to an agreement, and then it's been so far it's been pretty successful. At least every year it's a different muscle group that I'm tearing up.
And I just saw a question come across. Salli and Joe, what do you mean by blowing out your forearm?
Okay. It actually, you start feeling the pain. For me, I would feel on top of my wrist and everything, and it was just a pressure. And I don't know if it was because I had my, when I was paddling, I didn't have a neutral, it's called neutral wrist. It was the torque or whatever. You start building up pressure, and the next thing you know, it gets very painful, and it starts blowing up. It swells huge. At the end of the 2017 MR340, I was in a sling because I actually had to splint it starting at New Haven. New Haven seems to be my critical point. Anyway, I had to splint it at New Haven, so I did the last 55 miles with a splint. This past year, it was my right lat that blew out and I had to pull out at New Haven. But,
yeah, if you put your hand, your fingers on top of your wrist, so like right there, here's the bump, here's your bump of your wrist, right? Put it kind of toward the inside of your body, right here. And if you move your hand up and down, you can feel it. You can feel the tendon moving back and forth as it pulls your hand back and forth as you do this. And so when you say the feather, right, I had the same problem. I had a very strong feather, and so one of my hands was constantly doing this. And
Yes.
this just exactly the same. Very painful, swole up. I had to go to the doctor and get
Cortisone.
anti-inflammatories and some steroids because it was so flared up. So I reduced my feather now to like 12 or 15 degrees. It's very, very small. Not sprinters in the Olympics will have a 60-degree feather, but I keep mine at like 10 to 12 because I don't want that to happen again. I think when you're doing endurance racing, right, hours and hours, days and days, you have to think about all these little things that pile up, the straws that pile up finally break the camel's back on some of these body issues and maintenance issues,
Absolutely. And you're exactly right. It's that tendon right on the thumb side.
Mm-hmm.
And it will squeak if it gets so tight, and painful one, squeak and everything. Same thing. I had to have the anti-inflam shots, and I've got the hand and upper limb doctor on speed call because it's like I'm coming in.
And
But
I just want to kind of move ahead to Eric and get Eric's training for his 340. Sorry, I just want to kind of
absolutely.
keep things rolling.
Well, if Salli said hers wasn't as formal as Joe's, I'll say mine is probably not as formal as Salli's. I was actually when I started training for the 340, I had actually already been working with a personal trainer, writing programs, and I was sort of putting a half speed effort into it. So I didn't really get serious about training until May. And it was pretty informal. I spoke with my trainer. I first started studying paddle techniques and what kind of muscle groups are required for a proper paddle form. Been manufacturing my whole life and studied a lot about repetitive injury, and I think that helped me a lot, knowing that different ergonomic issues could cause injury. So I actually did a little studying on a proper paddle techniques, again, because I was completely new to the sport and I'm not an athlete of any kind otherwise. So it was pretty much all new to me. But my trainer obviously did some research as well. And we agreed that cutting weight was a big part of my training because I am a big guy. I think I was 255 when I started training for the 340, and lost about 30 pounds for that. So it was a lot of, I'd get 2 workouts a week from him for the week. And then on the weekend, if I was paddling, I would use that as my workout for the weekend, or I would do a third workout base. And it was usually some sort of a mixed cardio deal where it was very informal. He might text me, go find a hill and run up and down that hill, sprint intervals for 30 minutes. I mean, it was a lot of variety. That was a key part for me. I tend to do better with stuff that keeps my interest peaked. So every week I was getting something new. Didn't know what I would be doing. It might be a little bit of weight training. It might be something that looked more like CrossFit or some sort of a Tabata workout. But it was usually 30 to 45. 30 would be maybe a little on the light end. Maybe 45 minutes to an hour, twice a week, and then it once more on the weekend. And then of course controlling my nutrition was a big part of it. But that's pretty much most of what I did for training. It was very, very low. By way of comparison to our other panelists, it was not at all intense.
Well, it's kind of funny because I'm seeing some parallels between all three of you. Working out. I see Salli's getting about three workouts a week, give or take. Joe sounds like you're around 3 times in the boat, give or take per week. Eric, roughly 3 workouts a week. I mean, these are not really the long 40-hour Ironman workouts. So how much time do each of you put in? And let's start with Eric. How much time do you think you put in per week?
Raw time, I would say, again, depending on if I was going on a long paddle, anywhere from 3 to 7 hours, minimum of 3 hours, at least. 5 hours total for the week if I wasn't paddling. And then if I was paddling, obviously, depending on the distance, it might be more than that. Let's say 3 to 5.
Okay. Salli?
It depends on where I am in the training cycle, which, like I said, that's
Uh-oh.
Well,
Joe, if you
until
want to jump in.
until Salli gets back from frozen land. Oh, there she is.
What's that?
You were frozen for just a second there.
Oh, okay. Once again, chilly down here in Florida. But normally coming up when I'm into the race season, I am on the water or training, I would say at least 15 hours a week at the very least, because I do try to get in a few hours. I try to get in at least 1 hour as I'm coming up to the long races, at least an hour, almost every day, but at least 6 days a week, because for me, the most important thing is making sure that my hands stay tough. And so it doesn't have to be a hard paddle. I just need to have the paddle in my hand for about an hour almost every day. So it's rare if I have any blisters when I do these races. So that does make my hours of training a little bit more, but it's not hard training. It's just keeping kind of in shape.
So you're doing probably you said about 15 hours a week, give or take?
I would say easily at least 10 to 12 paddling. And then of course I'm always doing my stretches and push-ups and stuff like that. So
all right,
it's about right.
Joe?
I mean, I try to do something let's put it this way. You guys both said, well, I'm not as structured as Joe. That's ideal, right? There's real life that comes into play. So there'll be some weeks if I'm traveling for work where, I might be lucky if I get a 5K in. But before the world of COVID, right, when I used to travel quite often. So that's the ideal goal and aim. And sometimes you hit those weeks and sometimes you don't, right? Because there's real life. And but as far as, how many times I get out, I typically try to exercise every day but 1 or 2, right? So ideally I like to do 5 or 6 days a week of some kind of exercise all throughout the year. But there's weeks where I won't do a single day if it's just I'm doing a remodeling project in the house. I'm like, you know what, I just don't need to do it this week, or I'm traveling for work. But ideally I like to. But I don't do a lot of paddling hours, not as much as you think. But I first did the MR340 in 2007. And so if you look at, and I did tons of training back then. The first couple of years, I was doing 5 hours a week, 6 hours a week, 10 hours a week of paddling. And then I moved to Texas. I learned from a lot of guys down there and just, talked more and kind of made my own program. And now it's like, I just don't think I need it. I've got probably 3,000 or 4,000 hours of paddling of muscle memory built up in my body over the last 14, 15 years. So, I think, for me, 3 or 4 hours a week in the boat is enough. Someone said, I always remember this, someone said in Texas, I think it was West Hanson, said, if you train long and slow, you're going to race long and slow. You'll do better race, doing tempos and intervals and sprints 3 times a week for an hour or 2 at a time. And then once a month, do a big race that's 3 hours long or 4 hours long or 5 hours long. You don't need to do a 5-hour session every single week unless you're brand new. And then you want to do that not just for your muscles, but for everything. You want to know how your butt's going to sit in the boat the right way, because that's worse than anything else. For me anyways, is I'm like, Ryan Slebos always calls me the princess and the pea, trying to find the right seat cushions and make sure, all that stuff, all the little stuff, which I know you'll have another section on later, Chris. We'll talk about boat rigging and gear and all that stuff. But, you need to figure all that stuff out and get all dialed in on your boat. But, I've done that for 14 years. So, I don't need to do that anymore. I know all that. Now it's just making sure my fitness level is exactly where I want it to be and peak at the right time.
And real quick, I want to just jump on. I totally agree. I found when I was forced to take a break between the MR340 and the Alabama 650 this year, when I was rehabbing my lat, that I just did a very little bit of train up back on the water before the 650. It was the best race I've had. So Mike and I have talked about that perhaps I am putting too much time in by doing those weekly 5 hours and stuff like that. So that is something that, and I'm glad you brought that up, that we're going to be looking at pulling back on. And then the other thing is, you said work, remodeling a house. I always consider, long sessions of raking the yard, great for the hands. Great for your endurance, great for handling monotony, you know.
Shovel, go shovel something.
You got it, exactly.
Not a problem in Wisconsin right now. No, it's interesting because a lot of times you get the idea that, hey, you need to put in 15 hours, 20 hours, you know, whatever it is per week, like an Ironman. Or I come back to some of my run training, even in high school, cross country and track, and you'd put in, you know, 60 hours a week or 60 miles a week. 60 hours a week would be a lot. You know, 60, 90 miles a week for a 5K. And it's kind of interesting that no one seems to be doing that. We don't seem to be doing the long miles all the time. So how many of you do, and maybe I'm going back to the River Miles forums, but Joe, I know you probably remember this, people posting all the time, hey, I'm doing a 50 miler this weekend and next weekend and the following weekend. Is that maybe too much?
I don't think it's too much. Just remember that, you know, your ultimate goal is, it depends on what your goals are. I mean, so, and it depends on what level you're at now. I mean, so like I said, you may want to spend more time in the boat if you want to get comfortable, familiar, you know, whether that's in a mindset, you know, or just comfortable physically in your boat, and you want to have the experience of boat time. You know, it's kind of like driving a car. I mean, in some ways, I mean, you're going to become a better driver as you age, hopefully, because you'll just do it more, and so you'll have more experiences, more instances, more times you've been, you know, in a certain situation where you say to yourself, oh, I know to turn my wheels this way than that way. I know to pump the brakes. I know, right? Whereas, you know, that's why teenagers are high risk, you know, higher risk on insurance. So I think, you know, if you want to spend time on the boat to get familiar with your boat and get familiar with the river, that's fine. But I think once you get to that threshold of, okay, I don't need to spend more time in my boat for the boat's sake. I don't need to spend more time on the river for the river's sake. I mean, I don't go on the Missouri River at all. I have not trained on the Missouri River since 2008. I moved to Texas in 2008. I moved to Denmark in 2011. I moved back to Kansas City in 2014. And since I've been back, I don't train on the Missouri River unless it's a race that I go do, like the Freedom Race or the Shootout Race or something like that. I just don't need to, because I know the river so well, because I've done the MR340 15 times. But if you want familiarity with the river, go to the river. Otherwise, just get on some water and do what's, you know, convenient for you. Balance it with your life, you know.
Okay. And go ahead.
No, I had a similar experience to what Joe talked about on a sort of a macro level within one season. Because I only have the one season, but I started out and I would paddle every weekend. Are you guys with me?
Yes.
Okay, thought I froze there. I would paddle every weekend because I would go out on a training run and I would identify some issue with how my body fit with the boat, some pain, my seat, etc. And I would make a change and I would feel compelled to go test that change. And so I was doing a lot more training, but initially when I first started, but then when I got closer to the race and I was doing longer and longer runs, it was actually a friend that told me, he said, you know, marathoners, they don't run marathons to train, they do sprint intervals. And I mean, that seemed to make sense. I've never run a marathon. I'm not any kind of athlete, but once I got familiar with the river and how to navigate it and how to paddle and how my boat and gear needed to be rigged out, I started doing shorter training runs. I went shorter and got longer to a point where I felt comfortable on 100 mile down from Jeff City. And then it was like, okay, let's just go out and do some sprints for 30 miles. And it worked really well.
Only in the 340 do you hear the term sprints for 30 miles. So what would you tell, and I'll start with Salli on this one. What would you tell a rookie coming in who, for example, hasn't started training, just signed up for the race, has the best of intentions, but here we are at the end of January. What do you do?
Okay, boy, that's first you want to find somebody that if you can, that knows a little bit about paddling, so that when you go out and try different boats, try to have the ability to try different boats before you just buy your boat and get in it. You have somebody that can talk to you about how it's supposed to feel. I know when I first started out in 2012, I didn't know how a boat was supposed to fit. I started out in a sea kayak, and I ended up buying something that I was swimming in. It was such a high volume vessel, but I had no idea how it was supposed to feel. I loved it. It treated me well. I got a lot of miles in it. But if I had somebody that could just kind of tell me what I was supposed to be experiencing, that would have saved me a lot. I went through a lot of different boats and gear and stuff like that. Eric, we talked about this earlier, or you were talking about this earlier. At the beginning, you just go through a lot of different gear and boats until you figure out what works for you. So if you could get with somebody that has some experience, absolutely, that would be the way to go, just to kind of help you get a leg up. Um, and then it is just getting out there. I think at the start, you just have to get a lot of miles in to know how it feels for you and know how to adjust. I'll just kind of leave it there as a start.
And Eric, what would you suggest?
Eric's on mute.
You're muted, Eric.
Actually, my internet froze when you asked that question. Could you just sum it up again?
How would you handle it if you were starting training as a rookie right now after this seminar, the end of January, for the 340 this year?
Well, research was a big component for me because I wasn't an athlete and I knew nothing about paddle sports. I read the book. I watched all your videos, and that really gave me a baseline for a target. I found out that it was how important your core strength is for it. So I know it sounds counterintuitive because it's not exactly training per se, but learning about the sport and what's required sort of guided and directed my training. So I really would start there. If you don't already know that stuff, many of our participants probably already know that stuff, but I didn't coming in. So I had to learn a lot. I think Salli mentioned that there's this just really, really steep learning curve in the beginning. And then once you got that base knowledge, then just start somewhere, just get started. I'm kind of a procrastinator. So it was the first few weeks were difficult for me to get into a routine of working out. So it may not be perfect in the beginning, but get started. That would be my advice to a brand new person.
All right. And Joe?
Yeah. So I think it's like you said, you need to kind of understand, kind of maybe write down what your goals are and say to yourself, okay, where do I want to finish, and understand kind of, I always look at it this way. Anything any project you're doing, where are we starting from? Where are we today? Where do we want to get to? And how are we going to get there? Right. So it's a simple, it's how I approach things in life, work, business, sports. So where are we today? Where do we want to go? And how are we going to get there? So what are your goals? What are your fitness levels today? How much knowledge do you have? And then how do you bridge that gap? And so, brand new, I know this, full disclosure, I started Midwest Paddle Racing so that I could make races so we could prepare for the MR340 when I was living in Denmark. And I was like, I'm just going to make races so that when I come back for the summer, I can train hard with folks, right, and compete. And that's where it started. But this will be our 10th year. And I would say come to races, come to some of these smaller races. We build them up throughout. So whether it's the Gut Buster's Charlie Lockwood's, but there's the Gut Buster, then there's the Mean Lamine, then there's the Shootout, and then there's the Freedom Race, and they're spaced out, about 3 or 4 weeks apart, and they grow in distance in time, to kind of help folks get ready for the 340. So I would say go there, and you're going to be able to talk to a lot of folks that have done a lot, other folks that are kind of learning as well. And at the finish line, where we're all sitting around eating hot dogs and watching folks come in on the race, then you can learn. Real fast while we got it here, I know we've got a few questions that came in. I'm just going to whip through these really fast. I wrote them down.
No,
So Wayne Lockyer, you said why 12 degrees? That just seemed like the right feather for me. Just play with it how you like, and that's it. Shannon had asked about diet. I think we'll talk about that later, Chris. Tyler and Julie, you guys ask about braces and wraps on your arms. You heard Salli talk about that. I try to make sure that I don't get into the situation where I need to do something like that. So it's about figuring it out ahead of time. I know it's not a great answer, but that's what I would say. Pat had asked about, what kind of weight training I do in the winter. I like circuit training. I always do circuit training. So I don't do legs day and shoulder day or back day or chest day or bicep. I just do a circuit. I do a circuit every time, and I'll do it 2 or 3 times a week. And I'll do a quick, a quick circuit, about 15 or 18 exercises, and I switch them up every now and then, but it'll encompass the entire body. And then in between my circuits, I'll jump on the ergometer, and I'll do 20 or 30 minutes on the ergometer. So it's a 2-hour session, and I jump in there in between those circuit liftings. Andrew asked about wedding rings. I take mine off every time. I never paddle with a wedding ring, but A-Dog always paddles with his wedding ring. In fact, he took a pair of grips and squeezed his ring so it's an oblong shape, so it never comes off his hand. I don't know how he does that, because I would have blisters coming around my wedding ring if I didn't do that. But don't lose it. Take it off at the house. Don't take it off as I did in 2018 and forget at the starting line and take it off and put it in my car. And then after 18 years of marriage, I lost my wedding ring that year. This is a new one. And Tiffany asked about support crew. I think we'll talk about that later as well. So we still have diet and support crew on the answers that are unasked yet.
So moving ahead a little bit, what do you think is the minimum amount of training to get someone through the race? And I'm going to preface this by saying in 2013, I did 2 miles. There's a story behind that. 2012, I had done the race. 2013, I went out to buy a boat 5 days before the 340. I hadn't trained at all. And I decided in the hour it took me to drive from Madison home to go ahead and try and race. And those 2 miles were trying to make sure I could stay upright in the boat. But the QCC 700 was a great boat at the time. And I managed to get through it, but it was 76 hours and it hurt. It was rough. What do you think is the minimum for a rookie to not die on the course?
Who do you want to target?
Oh, let's start with Joe.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know about minimum. I mean, again, I'll make my answer quick. I think you need to do where are you at, where you want to go, and how are you going to get there. I mean, so you just got to say to yourself, if you're comfortable enough with this, I mean, you go down your list, right? You go down your fitness level, your comfortness with the boat, your comfort level with your diet, so all these, your training, your craft, you're comfortable with night, or paddling at night. I know we had a question about night that I didn't answer. So, what are you comfortable with on all these things? And then you just say, okay, check that off or not check that off. Well, then I need to go do that. So if you say to yourself, I'm comfortable with all these things, where's your gap? What do you need to make sure you cover? Where do you need to make sure you improve? I mean, fitness level is always one, but again, if your goal is to finish the race, it's not to win the race, then you can probably get by with doing 2 hours every Saturday and calling it good in a canoe with your buddy. I mean, honestly, right?
Yeah.
But night when I'll take the opportunity to answer the night question. You should spend some, if you're going to paddle at night, you should certainly train on night. Night's crazy. I mean, Salli, you and I've done the 650 together or we have each done the 650.
Yes.
We've each done the Texas Water Safari. Those 2 races at night are different than the MR340 at night. The MR340 at night is the easiest to do of those 3 at night. And it's still a mind warp, right? I mean, you're out there at night and the trees look like dinosaurs. The light reflects the shadow, the way it reflects. If the light source is behind.
Oops.
Oh. Well, we seem to have lost Joe for a moment. So, seeing as that's the case, Salli, what do you think on minimum training to finish the race?
Well, actually, I had to echo what Joe was saying. It really has a lot to do with where you are and what you want to do. And as long as you do this, the prep and everything enough, whether it's raking the yard or whatever, just trying to toughen up your hands, I would say just you could do it as short as a few hours a week, but it's all about making sure your body's ready. I mean, the one thing that I have found in my my short career is that it is, as long as I can keep my skin integrity in shape, You know, as long as nothing gets breached, then I can do almost anything. You know, even with the blown out wrists and the lat did. That was the only one that actually made me pull out of a race. But it's when you start getting the tears in your hands, or the tears on your bum or whatever, or the a lot of people will get the rub rashes on their torso. That's when you start having issues that could stop your race. Maybe not the MR340 because it's relatively short, but those are the things that I think are the most important to train or prepare for when you do these types of races.
All right.
So.
And Eric?
Well, I forget where I got the advice, and it may very well have been one of your videos, but somebody said to me that you should try to get at least on a couple of 50-mile races or 50-mile stretches underneath your belt. I think that actually might have been in one of your videos. And that's what I shot for. And I was able to do it. So I would say at least a couple of 50-mile training runs, preferably one of those being at night. And then if you can do one really long day, maybe I did a Jeff City down, and I felt pretty confident after that.
Okay.
Real quick, I'll just throw one other thing in. What I find that works the best, especially if you have minimal time for training, is training in a race environment, whether it's an actual race or a virtual race that has a certain time frame, because it will make you get out there no matter what the weather conditions are and the water conditions are. And most people, well, I'll just speak for myself. If I'm just going out to train, if it's a yucky day, I was like, I'll do it later. So I don't get the experience of the bad conditions. So if your time to train is minimum, try to put it in a race environment. You know, we started during this COVID stuff. We have a little racing Facebook page called 10th Life Kayaking, and we put out that, you know, we're doing it now, just once a month, we set up a virtual race. It's usually a 48-hour window that we establish, and we give, like right now, we're just doing like either a 3-mile course or a 6-mile course. That's some portion of a loop, wherein wherever you start is where you finish. You know, how you want to do that, back and forth 50 times or one time, you know, but it has made those who participate in, they appreciate it because, you know, they said, weather was rotten, would never have gotten out there, but boy, it was great. I learned a lot. So if your time is minimal for training, try to put it in some sort of a race environment so that it forces you to work conditions that you normally wouldn't do, and you get a bigger bang for your buck.
Yeah, and I see a question here that kind of plays into what we're dealing with. I see Joe's trying to come back on here. Do you have to, or can you build an aerobic base with fast intervals, or should you have a base before trying to get into intervals, assuming everything else is worked out? Assuming everything, like the boat and the gear is all worked out. Do you need the aerobic base before you get into intervals, or do you believe that you can just jump straight into intervals?
I think you can jump straight in, because that's the beauty of intervals, is you can customize them to what your abilities are at the time. Maybe you can only sprint for 30 seconds and then rest for a minute, and then build up from there. 45 seconds of sprint and then a rest, and you can shorten your rest, and so you can really customize it to whatever level you're at, which is essentially what you're going to do to build your base anyway. So I don't know why you couldn't build your base in the boat.
Absolutely.
Salli?
I agree wholeheartedly with you, Eric. And by the way, I disagree when you have said a couple of times you're not an athlete. You are. You've got the mentality. You know it. So I agree with you wholeheartedly. I do think that by doing interval type of training or sprint work helps you build that aerobic base. So it doesn't have to be one leads into the other.
Joe? We're talking about whether you need an aerobic base to get into intervals, or just jump straight into intervals from, you know, rookie level or from zero.
Yeah, no, I don't think that you need to have too much of an aerobic base. Depending on, like I said, where you start from. Just know that doing intervals is hard, right? Let's be clear, intervals sucks, right? Interval training is horrible. It's the worst thing. Your muscles are on fire, your lungs are on fire. it's not fun at all. And there is always a higher chance to some degree for injury when you do intervals. So I would say, like, you need to make sure that you're, aware of that, and make sure you ease yourself in a little bit, just in regards to, I wouldn't want to see anybody get injured.
So I want to change it up just a little bit. We've been dealing with a lot of physical training, and of course that's very important, but how do you prepare for the last 100 miles? Let's start with Eric on this one.
Well, my longest training run was from Jefferson City in, which is 110 miles. So I really didn't have any. I focused so much of my attention on that first day into Glasgow that I figured if I had to just float down from Jeff City, I'd make it. So I didn't put a lot of thought into how I would finish that last 100 miles. But what I found when the race actually happened, I hit Jeff City, and I hit Herman rather, Jeff City, excuse me. And I left there, Jeff City, at like 4 a.m. I was feeling pretty good. I was feeling sound. And so I just really, where I kind of reserved in the beginning of the race, I went as hard as I could, but I didn't want to go so hard that I gassed out before the end of the race. I figured, Jeff City was the last 100 miles was the home stretch. So at this point, I didn't feel like I was in danger of gassing out, and I was able to just really up the effort a little bit. And as I got closer to the finish line, that effect even compounded to where Herman was a big marker for me. I jettisoned some of my extra weight that I didn't feel like I was going to need, and hit it even harder. And then when I hit Klondike, I thought, wow, I've got enough time. I could really literally float down from here and still make my goal. And so there was no reason not to leave it all in the river. And I just went as hard as I could for the last 30 miles. And I think I wound up shaving off like 2 hours of my time, on that day, just with that philosophy of, hey, you've made it this far. You're going to finish. You're going to be okay. No reason not to up the effort to your maximum effort at this point. Whereas I was afraid to do that in the beginning, because if I maxed out too early and didn't have enough steam to finish, I could potentially be dropped out for that. So that was kind of my philosophy of the last 100 miles.
Salli, how do you train for the last 100 miles?
To be honest, I really don't. I'm kind of a one-speed gal, and so it's all in once I get my base up, whatever that is, that's kind of what I am. I'm not a particularly fast paddler, but I'm a consistent paddler. And so for me, it's so mental. And so I know I go point to point to point. So I'm always playing, very simple math in my head. I know that, Herman is X number of miles down the way. The time is this. I start doing, how many paddle strokes will that be for me to go, an hour or this hour, so it's just mental. But I never look at much longer than just what the next stop is. And I just don't look at big chunks.
Okay. Joe?
Yeah, so Washington to me is kind of the point. New Haven and Washington, kind of somewhere in that area, is where I tell myself, okay, here we lay it all on the line now. And like Eric said, whatever, you don't need anything else anymore. You need whatever's the minimum required things you need, water, food, etc. But I like to, it's to me, the last 40 or 50 miles is riding the knife's edge of the red line, so don't blow up, but you better be just right on that red line. That's what I try to do, and so yeah, I'll push it really hard. And I typically, with 3 hours left to go, I'll drink very minimal and I'll eat nothing, and I'll just go and lay it all out at that point, but I've done it both ways, where I feel like I've I've pushed too hard, and then I've bonked or crashed, an hour before the finish, and said, oh, and then you're limping in and trying to recover, or oh man, I could have gone a little harder. So I think over the last couple of years, I've started dialing, but that's not something. I mean, that's something that you only know. You listen to your body, like Salli said. You listen to your body, and you just ride that line. But it takes time to understand that. So I think for someone, it's their first or second or third year, and you're trying to get better at it. I would say, whatever your goals are, you can always push yourself a little harder at the end, because you know that you're close. And so it's kind of when the horse sees the barn, they run a little faster. But I would say just, don't go too hard. Ride that red line.
Okay. And so, I mean, some of us are starting to get a little bit older. Obviously, Joe doesn't actually age, but the rest of us do. So as you get older, how does your training change as you move from, your 20s into your 40s into your 60s, whatever it is? Have you changed anything? So let's start with Salli on this one.
Pick on the old girl. Huh?
Well, don't look a day over 30. Come on, Salli.
No, double that and you got it. I think it is, like I said, I'm relatively new to the paddling sport, but I'm not new to endurance sports. And one thing I've learned over the years is to listen to my body. And I've never have been, when I used to do ultra distance running, whether it was a 50 miler or whatever, you pay so much, you go, you have a 12-hour limit. And I used to think, I pay for 12 hours, I'm going to take 12 hours. But for some reason, when I've gotten into the paddle sports, something kicked in and I like racing. So it is a little bit of a difference than what I've done throughout my career or lifetime of endurance activities. So what I have found is that I really, really have to be listening to my body. I really have to take stretch breaks, whether it's once an hour, I take my hands off the paddle and I work my back muscles. And, if you want, the other thing I found is I can't ignore the little nagging pain. If I don't address it, if I don't make that adjustment, then I will pay for it. Things that I used to be able to get away with, I can't get away with as easily now. So it's all about, for me, just really listening to your body and respecting what it's telling you.
All right. Joe?
Yeah. Just know your body and listen to it. And know the difference between, and it's easy. I mean, it's like easy to say know your body, and everyone who's listening says, well, what are you talking? Can you give me some specifics, probably? It's understanding the difference between pain and injury. I think if you could say to yourself, listen between the difference between pain and injury, you're gonna have pain, right? I mean, anybody who does a 340 or anything endurance wise, you're gonna have pain. There's no question there. But is the difference, what is it? Is it pain that your body's telling you, or is it injury, right? So if you're like what Salli and I were talking about before with the wrists, I mean, that's injury. I've done the race 15 times. I've finished 14. The only time I pulled out of the MR340 was 2019, and which was last year, 18 months ago. And it was because these started flaring up again on me. And it's because I wore gloves, and I hadn't trained with gloves, because until the MR340 happened in 2019, in November, it wasn't cold enough to need gloves. And then all of a sudden the weather just changed 3 weeks before the race, and I hadn't trained in gloves. Well, having 3 millimeters, of thickness in here, all of a sudden your paddle shaft, your grip becomes different. And now this all just blew up on me again. And I knew when I got to Franklin Island, I said, I'm going to hurt myself if I continue. And it was the hardest thing to do, to pull out. And I did. I had to. I knew I had to. But I mean, it's like, oh, I've got some chafed skin. Yeah, it's horrible, but it's not going to cause me effects. I mean, I'm just going to have to grin and bear it, So I think that's the biggest thing I would say is listen,
All right. And Eric, anything to add to that one?
Can you give me the question again? I lost you for a second.
Basically, as you get older, have you done anything to change your training at all?
Well, this was my first one, but yeah, I would echo the same thing. I thought at my age, I'm 46 years old, and I'm heavy set going in. I said I really need to pay attention to potential injury. I had a number of problems with tailbone pain, piriformis pain, and I like Salli said, I've found some stretches that were a game changer. And so, yeah, as soon as I would start to feel that ache, I would, well, initially I decided to do them at stops, but then I even figured out my boat was stable enough that I could do the stretch in the boat. And that was remarkable. So yeah, just watching those early warning signs and don't try to overdo it, would be my only advice.
All right.
Similar to what Salli and Joe said.
Okay. And looking at the questions coming in, I know I may have forgotten to mention earlier, we will look at the questions towards the end here. We have time for a Q&A, so we will get to that, not forgetting about you. So I want to change gears a little bit and talk about mental training and how to deal with sort of unique things that come up in the 340. So how do you prepare for the boredom and the dark times, as I tend to refer to them, on the 340? And we'll start with, I think we'll start with Eric this time around.
Well, I wasn't in the group of what I would call more elite racers, so the time wasn't as critical for me. So I had music out there, so I would occasionally goof with my music. I was texting friends and family that were checking on me with the Race Owl app. That was a huge time suck. It really was. I lost an hour just to texting and playing on my phone when I should have been paddling. And you know how text messages are. You text and you sit down and you start paddling and somebody texts you and then you're up down with the paddle. So if I wanted to shave off time, that'd probably be one of my first things to do, is put my phone down and stop texting. But that helped me with the boredom. It really did. And it helped me with the dark times. I had friends cheering me on and like, hey, this is so fun. I'm watching you on Race Out, and hey, it looked like a barge just passed you, and we'd talk and we'd chat. So particularly in the first day, you're with a lot of racers. So there's really wasn't a lot of boredom. I'm a friendly guy. I like getting to know people. So you're talking and you're interacting with people. But as people in the field start to spread out, I wasn't even really alone until like the third day. And I spent a good portion of the third day paddling by myself. But yeah, I had my music, I had my phone, and I didn't experience a lot of the darkness that I hear people talk about. I was a little disappointed. I never hallucinated. I was kind of looking forward to that and seeing what that would be like, but it never happened to me. So the long training run really helped. Doing 100+ miles in a training run, really, you kind of get a feel for what that's going to be like to bottom out and keep going. So yeah, I don't know that I experienced this, because I think because I wasn't going at it so intensely until that last 100 miles, I don't think I experienced it the way a lot of people did.
All right. Joe, how do you deal with boredom, the dark times, that sort of thing?
So boredom, I do math. I do math in my head the whole time. So I have a GPS, but I actually have two GPSs. So I use two Garmin eTrex 20s or 20X or whatever. And one will have my line on it, and one will have my dashboard, my odometer, my miles, my moving to average, all that stuff. So, and because I used to have one, and then I got tired of having to stop paddling to switch between the two. So I have two now. And then, but I also have a split chart that I keep laminated in the boat with me, and I'll just sit there and do math in my head. I'll do, okay, my average miles an hour is this from the last, mile marker I saw to the next mile, or from the last ramp to the next ramp. What do I need to be right now? What does my speed need to be right now if I want to make my average this, so I can make my overall average this? And so I just play those numbers in my head the whole time. And sometimes I'm, brain dead, and I forget like even what I was adding together anymore. And that's okay, because then I'll just start over again. So that's kind of how I do the boredom. I hate music during the race because it'll put me to sleep. Doesn't matter if it's like Metallica or something. It doesn't matter. how heavy it is or hard it is, I'll still fall asleep. So I don't listen to music. But as far as like the dark times, like the downtime, I've said this before. It's almost like your body will convince your mind to convince you to quit the race, right? Like it's like almost like a crack addict or a drug addict who like there's always a justification to quit the race, right? Oh, I'm such a horrible father. I should spend more time with my kids. I should just quit the race and go home to them right now. Or oh, this is ridiculous. Why am I doing this? Like there's no reason for this. Like I should just go like take a class and be a better professional or something, right? So there's always like some reason why your mind will start to force you to want to quit, and you just have to like take that pain and usually it's pain is the root of that, right? You're like, this is horrible. Take it, lock it in the box, put it in the closet, lock the door, and just move on. And as far as hallucinating and stuff, yeah, Eric, I'm the same as you. I've never hallucinated ever, but there are times, and I started to say this before my computer shut down. I'm really sorry. I've never had that happen before. The computer just completely died, so I don't know what happened, but now I'm back. At nighttime, it's tough to understand distance. When you have like light behind like the bank, so if the moon's over here and it's shining down this way, you can see the edge of the bank. You can see where the water meets the trees or the mud or whatever. But if the moon's behind that, all that is black. You don't know if it's 5 feet or 100 feet, and it's an optical. It gives you an optical illusion. It looks like it's like you're in a saucer, and it's kind of like going up. It looks like you're going uphill, and it's really, really weird at night. And your eyes will start to, anybody else here, I'm sure of the participants listening, Johnny Ortiz, I know you and I've talked about this. When you're coming to a bridge at night on the Missouri River, sometimes it looks like you're paddling almost to the edge of an infinity pool, and you're going to drop off the edge. Like because you can't see the night. And so the sky, you can't see the horizon beyond the bridge. And so as you're coming to it, you'll say to yourself, I'm going to paddle off a cliff. This looks like a waterfall. Like I'm going to go straight off a waterfall. And you just have to tell yourself, there are no waterfalls on the Missouri River, right? You'll see a twig in the you'll like, oh, there's an alligator's head or a snake, or like there's no alligators in the Missouri River. Like, so you have to make your common sense like you have to like have a conversation, like it's almost like a Golem in Lord of the Rings, Smeagol, right? Like having the bipolar conversation with himself. You have to say, no, that's not an alligator. No, that's not a waterfall. And you just have to make yourself really force yourself to understand that that's not possible, and to push on.
All right. And Salli, boredom, dark times?
I also, I'm always doing math. Absolutely. And, as Joe was saying, it's all about average speed, or can I pick up, I always have to have a watch so I can see, the actual digital time and everything. So, I'll start right at the beginning of a minute, and then I'll count how many strokes. And then I was like, okay. And then what was my distance? Okay. So then if I did that, how many times do I have to do that to get a mile? And so then I'll do that count of my paddle strokes, and then I'll look, did I go a mile? So just always nonstop doing stuff like that. As you go further into the race, the simplest of math becomes very complicated, and then I have to start all over, like, where the heck was I going with that thought? So that does take a lot of my time. And the other thing is, I won't listen to music either. But I do sing a lot. That's one of the nice things about being by myself is I sing a lot. I don't know the lyrics. I can't carry a tune in a bucket, but it's fun. I'm always singing or talking. So if I'm quiet, it's because I'm doing the math. Sometimes I mutter the math, but usually, I do that quiet. So that's, I rarely have the dark times. The only time I have the dark times, the only time I've ever had the dark times, like during the nighttime, was my first Alabama 650, where I had had a huge blister on my bottom, and therefore I couldn't rotate, I couldn't move, I was more stationary. And I got this on the very first day, and without having that motion, without my night times got really, really hard. It was the weirdest thing. I didn't know, is this just an age thing? It kind of threw me for a loop, and it was my last big race of the 2019 season. So I didn't know. So I was kind of concerned how I handled 2020. And I found out though that it was just because I was so immobile. So movement, I always think, I keep that technique in mind and everything like that. And it kind of keeps me going through. So that's it in a nutshell, big nutshell.
And we're starting to get towards question and answer, but I see Joe's walked away. How do you guys use racing for training? Specifically, I want to give Joe a chance to plug his race series again. Freedom Race, which I generally come down to, but then, the shootout, the mean Lamine, etc. So how do you use your racing for training?
Yeah, so I like you said, I typically do the small races as build-ups and lead-ups to the big race, right? And thanks for allowing me to have the plug. But no, I mean, when we created Midwest Paddle Racing, that's exactly what it was for. And since then, we've grown to 5 races now. Three are kind of, which is the mean Lamine, the shootout, and the Freedom Race. But they are, they are geared in both distance and time, apart. So 3 or 4 weeks apart, a couple hours. The Lamine's about 2 or 3 hours. The shootout's about 4 or 5 hours, and the Freedom Race is about 6 or 7 hours. So we try to gear that up to help folks prepare for the MR340. And not only do you get time on the river and time to train, but you also get to see other folks and discuss, and ask questions and learn. And I've never met a better group of folks than Midwest paddlers. I mean, it just seems like everybody is willing to answer questions and talk. And I mean, when I was, 15 years ago when I started, there was no races. I mean, the MR340, I mean, Scott, when he started this race, had this vision. This is why we're all here, so hats off to him and his vision, and kudos. And this is amazing, right? And now the MR340 is one of the National Geographic's top 100 adventures, in the United States. So that's amazing.
And Joe, to follow up a little bit, Freedom is typically 3 to 4 weeks prior to the 340. Do you do any training between Freedom and the 340? Do you just kind of?
Yeah. No. So we'll so for me personally, I'll do the Freedom Race, and that'll kind of be like your peak of training before you taper to the MR340. So I always wait for Scott and now Steve to announce, what date the MR340 is going to be. And then I work the Midwest Paddle Racing schedule backwards from there. So I'll say, okay, we're going to do somewhere between 3 to 3.5 weeks before the MR340. We'll do the Freedom Race. Then I go about 5 weeks before that, and then 3 or 4 or 5 weeks before that. And that's where we put those races.
All right. Salli, how do you use racing for training?
Well, I'm in the Panhandle of Florida, and we don't have a lot of long races or big races or even moderate sized races. We've got a lot of little sprint races with stand-up paddle boards is basically it. But no, there is a real cool group called the Florida Competition Paddlers Association. They're more down in lower Florida, but they put on every 2 or 3 weeks, they have a race or an event, to get together. And they can be up to about 10, 11 mile type of races, which I try to do those if I can. But I don't really, like I said, I just kind of do my training, and I do my virtual races that, this past year has shown me how to do that. To go lead up to like the water safari. So that'll be kind of like my first milestone. And then, from between the water safari, well, actually you have the marathon, which is something like just a 31 or 32 mile race, about 5 weeks prior to the water safari. So, that's kind of the stepping stones to that. Then I have a little bit of a lull before the 340, and then a little bit of quite a long lull between the 340 and the 650. So once again, I'll go back to just, I'm just doing sprint work and interval training. We don't have like the Midwest paddling series or anything like that, or what they have over in Texas, unfortunately here. Maybe we can get it going.
And Eric, how'd you use racing for training? Eric? You're muted. There you go. Or you're frozen.
Who, me?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Was it my turn to answer?
Yeah.
Okay.
So
yeah, I did freeze for a second there, but I heard the question. So I was actually really excited about the race series that Joe puts on. I had intended to do the Freedom Shootout or the Freedom Race, but a scheduling conflict prevented me from doing that. So I just had to do another long run on my own. But I was able to do the shootout, and it was really helpful. I mean, it was cut short this year. I think Lexington was closed due to flooding. So I think we got out at Fort Osage. Right. So it was only like, about a 30-mile run. But I mean, just the experience of getting out into the finish at the starting point at call point and taking off. I mean, gosh, man, we got there late. And that was part of the experience. We got there late, and so I'm rushing and I'm throwing gear in my boat, and I hadn't really had a time to set it up. And so I hop in my boat and I paddle out to the middle of the river, and I'm fiddling with my gear, and it's getting closer to the countdown, and I'm fiddling with my gear, trying to get settled. And I was talking to people that were around me, and I made some new friends, and it was just like rushing to get ready. And I finally, within like literally, they were starting the countdown, and I was like, okay, I'm good. And I take a breath, and the guy next to me says, you're in the front of the field and you're facing the wrong way, right? And I looked up, and the entire race was looking at me, and I had no idea. So you can actually see me in the video paddling backwards to get out of everybody's way so I could turn around. So I'll never forget that. It was a great memory, and it was just getting out there and seeing call point and realizing I'm supposed to be going that way, not that way. I wouldn't have been able to do it without the shootout race. So
all right.
I remember that. I think I was next to you.
Were you really? Yeah. Yeah. I mean, because I had watched Chris's videos, and he said, so, and I heard it. He said, for you people that are going to be in the mid to back of the field, be courteous and get out of the elite racers' way. And I said, well, it resonated. That makes perfect sense. I knew I wasn't going to be in the front of the field, so I thought I was in the back. But I was in front. And I just remember looking up, and everybody's looking this way, and I'm like, oh no, it's got like 4 seconds.
Make sure you know which way the river runs.
Right.
Right. So I'll give Eric a little bit of defense here. So if you're not paying attention, the call point is when you're on the Kansas River, that's where the start of the shootout race is staged. It's also the start of the MR340. And that's why we do the shootout. It's the first 50 miles of the MR340. And the Freedom Race is right in the middle. It finishes at Jeff City. So you get a really good chunk there too. But on call point, the Kansas River typically is very calm. You usually get even some backflow from the Missouri, but the Kansas River is still flowing into the Missouri. So if you just don't paddle at all, you'll move like, an 1/8 of a mile an hour towards the Missouri River. So I'm guessing that Eric probably was like getting his stuff ready. He was a little bit late as he was talking. And then he didn't realize that he was just slowly moving towards the front of the pack, because everybody else is kind of just every now and then paddle backwards to hold their line. And Eric's like, okay, I got this. And he's probably just, and all of a sudden he looks up and he's like, oh man.
It's forever immortalized in the video of me just literally the buzzer goes off and I do a beeline for the back of the pack backward. Oh well.
So what I want to do is cover a couple of quick bases. If you go on the 340 forums, rivermiles.com, I have posted a bunch of training material there. There's a packet that's now available from Science of Paddling, which is a endurance-based training program that he put together. That's Sean Burke, and guy's last name is Olson, his partner up in Michigan. I also put up there my training for 2012 all the way through 2018. What have I done and the results? And I think I put one more program up there. I also have from an old Facebook post that I think is probably 4 years old, and I'll type it up and post it. This old, what we did for training that was posted on the Facebook page. And that's Joe Mann wrote up his stuff. Mark Holloway doing almost entirely long cardio, Dylan McCarty, Phil Bowden on there, Wayne Anderson, the Canadian Wonder, with his strength, swim, and erg routines. So I'll try and get this up as well for people who are interested. So what I want to do now is get into some of these questions. So from Tiffany, do your other senses kick into high gear when you're paddling at night? For example, hearing. Joe, Salli?
I mean, yeah, I think so. Yeah. Yeah, you want to be aware of that because you'll hear water rushing around things. I think that's the sound that I hear most, or I listen for most, is to hear water rushing around something. You know, on the Missouri River, you'll hear it on a wing dike, you'll hear it on a buoy or a bridge piling, and you realize it sounds a lot louder at night than maybe it did in the day. And so yeah, you do have some other senses pick up because your eyes let go, and you know. But I think at the end of the day, you need to balance it more with ears and eyes than in the daytime. You just rely on your eyes. Yeah.
Salli,
Yeah,
Eric,
music.
anything to add to that?
Yeah, I didn't play music at night. I just didn't feel comfortable with that because you can't. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
for
Go ahead.
me, what I'm finding is, or what I found is, I totally agree about you definitely have to be listening for those different sounds and everything, but lights. I try my best to go, I don't use lights. And I make sure that I have my GPS where I can reach it so I can dim the screen, because that screen becomes really bright at night. So you want to dim it down so you don't ruin your night vision. So I love going without lights, and whenever I happen to get around somebody with lights, I try my best to get away from that person. And I'll tell you, that was really hard on the Texas Water Safari because they've got those big old things, you know. But I do much better if I can just let my night vision do its work.
Certainly, let me jump because that's a safety issue. So I feel very strongly about that. Let me jump in on that. I agree with you, Salli. On the MR340 especially, and you know, you should let your night vision take over. Don't worry about lights, seriously. And if you can get a flashlight in your boat, there are times you're going to need to see something in your boat because you need to grab a food or a drink or go to the bathroom or whatever. Get a red light. Exactly. So but don't turn on big lights because the MR340 is always scheduled during the full moon, and so typically you can see quite well, and it's better to let your eyes adjust. So don't turn on big bright lights, and just have a very small glow stick down by your feet or something, to almost like the glow of a vehicle. If you have a car that has those little fancy lights on the bottom, something like that, you know, like that's really fine. But otherwise, don't do lights. Yeah.
Let's see. From Judy, have you ever run into logs or other debris at night? I think we all have. I've got some great memories, I think, going back to 15 or 16, where it was like Star Wars going through the meteor belt.
Asteroid field. The odds of
everything.
Successfully navigating an asteroid. Yeah, exactly.
I was in a rotomolded plastic boat, so I kind of felt indestructible out there. I didn't really dodge the logs like my friends that had fiberglass or carbon fiber boats did. I'd just bounce. It was like bumper boats all the way down the river. They're slow, but they're tough.
All right.
And I know 2017 was the year that I did it, and it was full of logs and everything. And yeah, I was riding on top of a lot of them quite a bit towards the end.
Let's see, from Marty, with respect to gym training, is the bulk of it core or rotational trunk training?
Mine was circuit. Go ahead, Joe. Sorry.
No, go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, like Joe said, mine was circuit training. It was full body, but there was, I don't think my trainer ever gave me a workout that didn't have a core component to it. And literally every single workout, there was some sort of core movement, whether it was some planking or some bear poses or even just some garden variety sit-ups. Just there's 1,000 variations to work out your core. And he never let me get by without doing some core work in every one.
Right.
Yeah, lawnmower pulls are really good. Like where you kind of lean over a bench and you pull a dumbbell, right? Like you're starting a lawnmower. That's what I call them. I don't know, you're never, yeah, exactly. You're never supposed to do this, but I do a very lightweight where I literally just take it and lean over and then bend back up again. So it's like like you're not supposed to ever lift with your back. I lift with my back on this exercise where I literally just like lean over like a deadlift, but my legs are locked the whole time and I'm using my lower back to do that. But it's very lightweight, but I do that so that I can strengthen my lower back, and then of course garden variety sit-ups and all those things.
Salli, anything to add?
Not being a gym person, but what I do, I'm always working my core and my lower back. I've got this weird little back machine or whatever that I can hang from, basically from my quads. And just by tightening up my back muscles and raising up, so that I'm always working those back muscles. But then doing planks and push-ups for the rest of the core. So that's kind of where I focus. I'm a surf skier. Surf ski, you don't rest on a backrest or anything. So you have to use your core the whole time.
Yeah. And when your core gets tired, and this was my discovery, was that I when my training runs got longer, all of a sudden I started experiencing really bad tailbone pain. And I thought it was a problem with my pad. And I kept changing different varieties of pads and I tried making them. And invariably about 6, 7, 8 hours in, I'd start having tailbone pain again. What I found out was what was happening was as my core got tired, I'd begin to slouch. And I discovered this on YouTube videos that actually rolled your tailbone up underneath of you. So you wind up sitting on your tailbone. And the secret was more of an ergonomic one, was sit that seat way up, because that way when your core eventually gets tired, because it will, that'll keep you more in that upright position and keep you off your tailbone. And it made all the difference in the world.
And can Salli or Eric give details about the stretches they found helpful?
Yeah, I can do that. I actually just Googled one day. My girlfriend and I were driving and I Googled kayak stretching exercises. And I saw a couple of YouTube videos and tutorials on doing some different stretches. And I learned about the piriformis, and I was having really bad hip pain that I thought was exactly that. But in reality, that was referred pain from my sciatic nerve and that piriformis. So just Google kayak stretches. But the main one that changed my world was putting my right foot up on my left knee or vice versa, and then trying to touch the opposite shoulder to that and doing sort of that twisting motion. And that stretches that piriformis and relieves that pressure. And I did that riding passenger in a car, and it was like instant relief, because I had been suffering from the day's paddle before that. And literally just 2 stretches instantly felt better. And so I started doing that at every stop. And then it got to a point where I realized I could lift one foot out of my cockpit, I could put it in my lap, and I could do that same stretch, and I could get off that and just give that a minute of relief. And that was really the only one I had to do, but there were like 6 or 7 of them that were specifically for kayakers.
And Salli?
Very similar to Eric, maybe a little bit more basic, sit on the floor, straddle your legs, lay, flat as you can be, hold it for a little over a minute, then do the same thing towards your right leg, same time toward your left leg, and then bring your legs together. So, but you hold them as far as you can. And I always do them for over a minute. Actually, for some reason, I do it for 70 seconds. And then I do a couple sets of those. I do those every day. The other thing I find is, because I'm always sit erect, very upright and everything. And I've learned that I've got to keep my shoulders down. And when I'm paddling, it's my back muscles, my upper back muscles, that start to get pretty tight. So by just kind of putting my arms up as a goalpost and squeezing my shoulder blades together, and then just bringing the elbows down to my side, it just works those muscles down the back. And I just do that a couple of times, and that's kind of loosens me up as I go. So I do that during my race. That's about the only time I take my hands off the paddle, because I get most of my nutrition through a tube. So my hands are always on the paddle, but then I start maybe just for about a minute every hour, I will do a quick little stretch. Mm-hmm.
And I've got a question here from Alex. Eric, did you have a time goal going into your first race or just a finish?
I did. I when I first signed up, I said, well, all I want to do is finished. And then as I got a little closer and more training runs and doing more math, I set a goal at 70 hours before the race, up to the race, starting the race, first day, 70 hours. As long as I'm under 70 hours, I'll be satisfied. But then as I began to do a little more math on day 2, I really thought, man, I think I can do 65. And so it was hard to do the math when I hit Jeff City.
Oh, Eric, you're glitching a little bit.
That's what Jeff City will do to you.
Yeah.
Based on my pace. And I left there at 4 a.m. and I wound up beating it. I set a goal, changed the goal, and then beat the goal. I hit 62.5 hours. And so I was really pleased with it. I felt like that was really a respectable time for a guy my size in my boat for a first time paddler. I was really happy with it. So yeah, I got a goal.
Yeah, and I've got a question from Shannon Robinson. What time frame do you train with the same diet that you use during the 340? So when do you start using the nutrition that you're going to use in the 340? I don't want to get into big nutrition.
Yeah. I do. So for me personally, I do those types of nutrition on my races. So like once a month, right? So if I'm really competing hard, really going for it, but again, so I'll do it like, 3 or 4 times that year leading up to it, every 3 or 4 weeks,
Okay.
Because, but again, I've done this for 12 or 15 years now. So I think if your heart rate is going to stay above 100 and if you're really competing hard and your heart rate's between 100 120 the whole race, then you need to get really comfortable and familiar with what you're going to use.
Yep.
Otherwise you can eat some regular food and supplement it, right? And so yeah, I would say it kind of depends on where your goals are and how high your heart rate's going to be, because that's going to depend what you want to eat, right?
Yeah. And
I think eating regular food is just fine. I really do, right? Some people don't, but I do. I mean, I can't just eat liquid diet. Salli, kudos to you. But if I don't have like a Subway sandwich or something in between, like I've got to have something that fills me up,
And Salli?
I will use I do a liquid nutrition type of thing. It's a powder mix that I do. And anytime that I am racing or doing a heavy paddle session that's anything longer than an hour, I'll use my nutrition, my powder mix and everything. It's just so easy for me, because it's part of the training is that the hands don't come off the paddle and that I just do keep on going. So whether it's a race or whether it's a training session, anything that's longer than an hour, I'll usually will be using my mix. And I do on races that are, over 24 hours, or, I will eat some regular food kind of, because you have to have some kind of bulk in there. But yeah, I'm pretty much, I get the majority of mine through this nutrition mix that I have. But it took me a little while to get it to the right mix. I was working, I use Infinite Nutrition, and they have mixologists. You talk to them, you say, hey, well, I'm still getting a little bit nauseous, or my energy's low, or whatever. And they will adjust, your blend to what your needs are. And it took me a little while, but I've got it where it's really dialed in, and it's a huge difference it makes. So
okay. And,
I have a special cocktail. if anybody's interested, text me or email me. I'll share my cocktails with you.
And Eric?
Yeah, I had been on controlled macros for a few months when the race hit. So I just literally kept those same macros all through the race. I planned a food bag for each day. I labeled it. Everything fit in a 1 gallon Ziploc bag, and I just gave my ground crew that bag for that day. And of course, the types of food were different because I couldn't cook or anything like that. So it was just some jerkies and some trail mixes and that sort of thing. But I actually didn't change anything with nutrition. I had been on the exact same set of macros. I didn't increase my calories. I didn't do anything for the race that I hadn't been doing for the months prior. So
okay, and I've got a few more questions, and I want to kind of rapid fire through these. So I'm just going to throw them to whoever I think is probably the best to answer. We've got. Let me see. For night paddling, what kind of water do you recommend? They're in the Bay Area. They've got the Port of Oakland, Bay Marshes. They don't have anything like wing dikes and buoys. So does the water matter if they're doing night training? Joe?
What, Sally, why don't you answer that?
Oh.
I have no idea with oceans.
Boy, that's kind of hard because night training, like I said, if you can be in a place where you're not around a lot of the lights from cities and towns, or that type of thing, so you can get used to what your night vision is. I would suggest
maybe
that
go up and down the coast. Maybe go up and down the coast so you get an idea on both sides, right? Like on your left and right.
Well, what I do, I mean, here we have so many, we're not just on the coast. We've got bays, we've got rivers, we've got, we have a lot of different types of waterways around here. So I can get totally away from civilization for hours with my paddling. So I don't have the issues with just having to do just the coast. That's fun though, but it's also a lot of light out there too.
Yeah, so basically, if you can get out at night somewhere, it's better than nothing.
Yep.
The only thing I'd say is just try to find a place where you don't have a lot of noises, because you don't have a lot of noises on the MR340 at night. You do when you come through some of the, like Jeff City, if you came through that at night, you might hear some, but for the most part, it's those stretches of nothingness that you want to get comfortable with. So if you can find a place to paddle at night that can be similar to that, where you really get to start hearing the natural noises of the night and the natural movement of the water, if you can get on moving water, and get to an area where your vision can really go into its own natural night vision, I think that would be the best.
Right.
And from a visual standpoint, learn like how your eyes can play tricks on you when you've got light coming from one direction or the other direction.
Very true. And then from Matthew on YouTube, raced twice, both times the middle 3 fingers on the right hand went numb for 6 months. How can they prevent this? Loosen up on the paddle. We won't ask Joe Mann about his hands because we've all seen the pictures of the blisters that the man gets. But yeah, anyone other advice other than just loosening up their grip?
That's really about it. I mean, I have the loosest grip. You'll see almost all the pictures. If you see me in mid-stroke, my fingers are flared. It's just, but you still can't help it. You're going to get pressured there. Whether it's take your hands off the paddle every once in a while and do this, or but it's just going to happen. Focus on having a light grip. Focus on changing up your grip a little bit. But I lose my pinky nails once or twice
every year.
Yeah.
Every year.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So this kind of brings an end to things because we're right about 5:36, so we've run over a little bit. But if you have further questions, if you post them to the Facebook page for the 340, I'm sure we can get answers for you. I'll jump on there later The other panelists can jump on there and answer those. I do want to thank Salli O'Donnell giving us all hope and putting up some serious pressure on the Kraken this year. She may be drafting them throughout the race. Joe Mann, who makes such a sacrifice for the race that he actually shaved his hair to save 3.5 ounces. And Eric Pikey, who has done a great job representing the vast majority of the field, the actual humans who aren't Joe Mann. On that note, next month, we will have another webinar. We're going to be looking at boat choice and gear. So we are going to be talking to Ryan Slebos, Ryan Milby, John McCoy, and Ron Ladsurfsky, or I don't even know what Ron's last name actually is.
Ladzinski.
So we'll be talking to them as our panel, again, looking at boat choice and looking at gear. That will be Saturday, February 20th at 4 p.m. So thank you to everyone who is involved. This will be recorded and put up on YouTube. And until next month, keep your paddle in the water.
Thanks, Chris. Great job.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.